Hello, friend. Thank you for being here. Whether you're an Aries yourself or simply trying to understand one in your life, what you're about to hear might just change everything because the truth is, Aries isn't as simple as people make them out to be. They're not just hot-headed, impulsive, or rebellious souls. No, they are a wind carrying fire, a whisper that can silence an entire room. A soul that, if you're not still enough, you'll never see the quiet complexity burning inside. And in this journey, I won't take you in to analyze them, but to witness them, to truly see. Let's begin at the place where all fire is born, the moment when fire begins to think. There's something no one tells you about Aries. Their fire can think. This flame isn't wild, chaotic, or fleeting like people often assume. No, the Aries fire is ancient. It watches. It waits. It stays silent, and because of that, it also knows how to burn. Have you ever stood near a small flame at night? It doesn't roar, it doesn't try to be seen, but something about the way it exists makes you unable to look away. That is Aries in their silence. We're used to the image of Aries as the one who charges in, the loud one, the bold one, the warrior leading the way. But what most people never notice is this. The most intense moment for an Aries is not when they explode, it's when they say nothing. But their eyes are still burning, because in that silence, they're thinking. And when fire starts to think, it's no longer just fire, it becomes strategy, a plan, a strike crafted from everything that once broke them. Aries doesn't break easily, but once they're wounded, they don't cry, they remember, they withdraw, and they turn pain into fuel, quietly, dangerously, without noise, but with absolute certainty. Have you ever felt perfectly fine, until an Aries looked at you and suddenly, it felt like they'd read you from the inside out? They don't question, they don't accuse, they just look. But within that look is a flame that doesn't burn on oxygen, it burns on instinct. It sees through your words, it sees through your armor, and touches the parts you thought were hidden for good. That's when you realize Aries doesn't need to do anything to shift a room. Their presence is already enough. We're taught to be wary of those who erupt, but sometimes the ones who say nothing are holding the quietest kind of storm. An Aries who's been misunderstood too many times no longer bothers to explain. They start to observe. They retreat from the noise, but inside, they remember everything, every word, every look, every ounce of disrespect, not to take revenge, but to make sure they never misplace their trust again. Because deep down, Aries isn't just a fighter. They're a warrior who's learned how to choose their battles, and that is what makes them powerful. A mature Aries won't react right away. They know some things require time. Some people aren't worth the sword, but there are lines, and once they're crossed, they are never forgiven. Aries can forgive your mistakes, but they'll never forget how it felt to be underestimated. And when they walk away in silence, no anger, no drama. Don't mistake it for weakness. It's because they know fire doesn't need to roar to be felt. It only needs to burn, quietly beneath the surface, and one day it will rise again and redraw the entire map. Have you ever felt something like that inside you? A part of you that everyone thought had burned out, but was only asleep. A part that doesn't need approval, just your permission to be exactly who it was meant to be. If you are an Aries or have ever loved one, remember this. Fire isn't always meant to destroy. Sometimes it's meant to light the way. And the most human thing you can do for an Aries is not to fear their silence, but to ask, what are you thinking? Because in that stillness, they may be becoming the most powerful version of themselves. So learn to love their fire even when it's quiet, especially when it's quiet, because thinking fire is the kind that can awaken a world that forgot how to feel. But Aries, they're not just fire. They also wear an invisible armor, one no radar can detect. But once you feel it, you never forget, and that is what we're about to explore next. The invisible armor when Aries doesn't need to defend themselves and still no one dares to strike. There are people who never have to issue a warning, never need to raise their voice, never build walls around themselves. And yet people still hesitate. They still keep their distance. They still feel the need to respect a boundary they can't quite explain. With Aries, that power doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from something deeper, a kind of energy only those who have felt it truly understand. It's a kind of armor they don't wear, but always carry. No one really sees it. It doesn't glow. It doesn't make a sound. It has no physical form, but you'll feel it if you ever lie to them, if you ever hide something with the wrong intention. Because the Aries soul is sharp, so sharp That even before betrayal shows its face, they've already sensed the distance. Even before the deception is spoken, they've already noticed it in your eyes, not because they're paranoid, but because God placed in them a spiritual radar, an inner alarm built for survival in a world full of masks. Have you ever walked into a room and just one person standing there made you close your mouth, not out of fear, but because you knew they were looking straight into your soul, and somehow you didn't want to lose the respect in their eyes? That's the kind of presence Aries carries, the kind that makes people hold back the worst parts of themselves, not because they're told to, not because they're judged, but simply because of the presence. That's why Aries doesn't need to defend themselves. They don't walk around guarded like someone who's been hurt too many times. They move through life as if wrapped in light, not the kind of light that comforts, but the kind that makes darkness take a step back. I used to think strength was something you built through effort, until I met an Aries who wasn't trying to be strong at all, and I realized real strength doesn't need to prove itself, it just needs to exist. Aries teaches us that some boundaries don't need to be spoken. You just live with so much truth that anything fake simply can't survive near you, so it's no surprise. When someone betrays Aries, they don't scream, they don't write long messages, they don't seek revenge. They just pull away quietly, no anger, no drama, and from that moment on, you'll never step back into their energy again. People say, don't pick a fight with Aries. But the truth is, you don't have to fight them at all. Just lose their trust, and you've already exiled yourself from their world. They don't hold grudges, but their soul won't reopen doors that have already been stained. And that's where I see God the clearest, not in a cross, but in the way a soul chooses to forgive but never forget, chooses to protect its light without needing to reject the darkness of this world. I believe God gave each of us a kind of armor, but the one Aries carries is something else entirely. It's not made to attack, it's made to sense what no longer belongs in their life. That's how they stay away from hollow relationships, from fragile trust, from promises never meant to be kept. If you've ever been close to an Aries, you'll know they don't try to control anyone, but their presence alone makes you want to be real. And if you are an Aries, I hope you understand this. That distance others feel around you is not coldness, it's your light protecting you. Don't shrink yourself to be loved, because the ones who truly love you will love the armor too, and they'll honor the way you've kept your soul intact. We're living in a time where kindness is doubted, and honesty is mistaken for arrogance. But Aries reminds us, truth is not a weapon, it's a compass. And those who carry that compass in their heart will never lose their way in a world full of wrong turns. Sometimes, what protects you isn't that you're strong, but that your soul simply doesn't let the unworthy in. And with Aries, that needs no explanation. But even with all that armor, Aries still has a heart. And that heart doesn't just beat, it drums. For every soul that refuses to surrender to fate. And in the next chapter, we'll listen to that heartbeat, the warrior's heart where emotion turns into power. There's something most people don't understand about Aries, and maybe they've never paused long enough to feel it. Their heart doesn't just know how to love or how to ache. It knows how to turn wounds into weapons. They say Aries is strong, but what no one tells you is, Aries used to be fragile, easily hurt, and so quick to love, with all the innocence a fiery soul could carry. Some people hide their pain, but Aries, they hold it up to the light, they study it, and they forge it into steel. Then they shape that steel into a sword, one they carry for the rest of their lives. You see, Aries doesn't suppress emotion like people think. They don't numb pain with apathy. Quite the opposite. They feel everything, deeply, sharply, completely, but they never let emotion consume them. They use it, they refine it, they turn it into strength. An Aries who's been betrayed will not lie broken in the rubble of questions. They walk through pain like a warrior walks through darkness. No complaints, no collapse, and when they emerge from that night, they carry a light that can never be put out again. I believe, and will always believe, that every soul is born with a sacred flame. But for Aries, God didn't place that flame just to warm their own heart. He gave it so they could illuminate the places others are too afraid to enter, so they could be the first to walk through fire, clearing a path for other souls still trembling in the dark. As someone who walks the path of Dharma, I believe every suffering is a seed of awakening, but only if we're brave enough to listen to the echoes within. And Aries, in their own way, has always listened. with the full heart of a warrior who refuses to fall. There are days they collapse, just like anyone else, but instead of reaching out, they close their eyes, not to escape, but to heal, silently, alone, in a space where only they and God exist. No one sees it, no one knows, but they come back quietly, relentlessly, not for applause, but for their own soul to rise again. If you've ever hurt so much that the tears stopped falling, if you've ever stared at the ceiling in the dark, wondering why you have to be this strong, just know, Aries has been there too, and they didn't just survive. They became someone entirely new, stronger, brighter, big enough to shelter others. In today's world where people praise positivity but run from pain, Aries teaches us a truth both simple and profound. You don't have to hide what broke you to be powerful. It's the cracks, the wounds, the lonely nights, all of it can become your sacred armor if you're brave enough not to turn it into hatred, but into light. And maybe that's why Aries is slow to open their heart again. Not because they forgot how to love, but because they once loved with their whole soul, and when that soul broke, they lost a piece of themselves with it. It takes time, realness, depth, for them to let anyone back in. I've always believed that a soul who transforms pain into compassion is a soul that walks among saints. And Aries, at their core, are sacred warriors living among us. So if you're an Aries, don't fear pain, don't run from heartbreak. You weren't born to dodge storms. You were born to walk through them and lead others who still tremble. And if you love an Aries, know this, you're standing in front of a heart that once shattered and rebuilt itself with fire. It may not be easy to love, but it is a heart worth loving with your deepest respect. And once they rise, once they return, they don't just move forward. They carry something that changes everything, the voice of power, and that is what we'll explore next. In the frequency of power when Aries doesn't need to shout to be heard. There are people who don't need to raise their voices, and yet everyone stops to listen, not because they demand power, not because they force their presence, but because their voice carries something deeper than sound. With Aries, power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from the way they speak and the way they don't. A single silence from Aries can shake the balance of a room. One sentence from them can shift the entire atmosphere, and that can't be taught because it doesn't come from skill, it comes from something God placed in them, from birth, the frequency of truth. The voice of an Aries doesn't scare people, it awakens them. Because in that voice, there's not just speech, there's fire, there's will. There's a life that's been forged in silence and storms. Have you ever met someone who, when they speak, you feel like something in you wakes up? Not because they're smarter, not because they speak beautifully, but because they speak from the soul, they speak from truth unmasked, unfiltered, and that's why their words slip past your defenses and touch the part of you you've been trying to forget. To Aries, every word is an arrow. They don't shoot often, but when they do, it hits right where it's meant to, and you're left with no choice but to reflect. I believe there are two kinds of sound in this world, the kind that fills the void and the kind that brings awakening. The voice of Aries belongs to the second. They don't need to scream to prove they are right. They don't argue just to win. They just speak when it's time. And when they do, something inside you wants to change. That's not influence. That's impact. At the level of the soul, if you've ever had an Aries strike a nerve, you know the feeling. They weren't trying to hurt you. They just saw the thing you were hiding, and they said it. Because honesty is their instinct, even when it makes others uncomfortable. That's why the voice of Aries isn't for those who only want comfort. It's for those brave enough to hear the truth. And sometimes that truth is the first step to healing. As someone who's seen Aries walk through their own private wars, I've realized something. They don't speak often, but when they do, it's not just words, it's their soul stepping forward to make its presence known. You may not agree with them, but you can't ignore them. And maybe that's the message I want to share with you today. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to be clear within yourself. When you know who you are, your voice will carry the frequency of truth. Truth always finds a way to travel, even when whispered. So I invite you, pause for a moment, think of someone whose presence alone shifted the room, who made your chest tighten, who made your thoughts sharpen. Have you ever met someone like that? Have you ever felt that kind of power from an Aries? If so, share your story in the comments, because maybe that light you felt wasn't meant for you alone. Maybe someone else listening here needs to feel it too. And if you are an Aries, remember this. Your voice is an instrument of truth. Don't be afraid to speak what needs to be spoken, as long as it comes from love, from experience, and from a silence forged over time. But Aries doesn't just change the world with words, they shift energy just by walking in. When they enter the room, the rules change. And that's what we'll explore next, in the ballroom of fire, when Aries bends reality without anyone noticing. There are moments so quiet, and yet they change everything. Someone walks into the room. No one notices at first. No loud entrance, no overpowering glance, and yet the room is no longer the same. The air grows heavier, words feel more honest. Old, buried emotions start to surface, and everyone feels a little different. That's what happens when Aries shows up. Aries doesn't have to touch anyone to move them. They don't have to do anything to change a space. Their presence alone rewrites the room, not with magic, not with pressure, but with a silent frequency that flows straight from their soul. I call it the ballroom of fire because Aries doesn't just enter a place. They recalibrate it. They shift the energy just by being there. And the most incredible part is, they often don't even realize they are doing it. They don't try to control. They don't aim to be the center, but reality bends around them anyway. Why? Because the soul of Aries is naturally aligned with the grand rhythm of the universe. That's why when you're near an Aries, you often feel clearer, like someone gently pulled you out of a dream. You wake up, you see what you've been avoiding, you realize there's nowhere left to hide. Sometimes they make you feel alive again. Other times so exposed. It's uncomfortable, and sometimes they remind you that you've never truly lived by what you believe. But Aries doesn't do this with hands or words or even looks. They do it with presence, with a vibration so subtle, yet unmistakable. We all carry an energy field, but with Aries that field is a shapeshifter. It stirs up what's been buried beneath layers of fear, habit, and delay. It isn't a gentle breeze, it's fire, and fire demands truth. Have you ever met someone and after one deep conversation, you quietly began to change your life? Not because they advised you, but because they awakened something that had been asleep inside you for far too long. That's Aries. They're not someone you can stay distant from for long. Either they pull you toward the truth, or you leave to avoid seeing yourself. And that is why so many fear Aries, yet feel deeply drawn to them, because somewhere in their subconscious they know Aries doesn't let you live halfway. Once you step into that ballroom of fire, you can no longer pretend you're okay. You can't keep denying what you truly want. And suddenly, more than ever, you realize how long your soul's been asleep. I've always believed this. In every awakening, there's a trigger, someone who enters your life and shakes the world around you. Just enough, not enough to scare you, but just enough to make you question everything. And for many, Aries is that trigger. As someone who's walked alongside souls in healing, I've come to understand something simple, yet profound. We don't need someone to change us. We just need someone who makes it impossible to keep lying to ourselves. And when you spend enough time around an Aries, you'll know exactly what that feels like. So the question is, what kind of energy are you putting into the world? And are you taking responsibility for it? Because Aries, whether they know it or not, they always carry that responsibility. They know. When they are angry, the space turns heavy. When they are calm, the world softens. And when they are inspired, other souls start to remember their own dreams. There are people who make you feel alive, and there are people who make you realize you've been asleep for far too long. Aries is often both, but all that power, it doesn't come without a cost, because Aries is not an immortal flame. They carry a quiet pain, an invisible emptiness no one else sees, and that's what we're about to step into next. The price of fire when Aries needs to be seen, not praised. There's a kind of loneliness that few people ever notice because it doesn't come with complaints. It doesn't show up on the face. It doesn't scream for attention. It hides behind a strong gaze, behind a confident smile, and behind those moments when Aries says, "I'm fine," and no one thinks to ask again. It's the loneliness of a soul that always shines, but has rarely been truly seen. Aries can do so much. They can lead. They can rise through chaos, endure pain without bitterness, but deep inside, there's a hollow space I call the empty throne, a sacred place in their heart that can only be filled by honest recognition, not praise, not applause, but the kind of look that lingers just one heartbeat longer and says, "I see you." That is what Aries fire longs for, not to be worshipped, but to not be misunderstood. Because here's the truth, when someone always appears strong, The world stops asking if they are okay, and when someone always leads, people start to assume they never need anyone to walk beside them. Aries knows this, and they accept it, but the cost is a silent crack. One that doesn't break them, but makes them laugh a little less, open up a little less, and sometimes doubt whether they'll ever be loved for who they really are. They are admired for their strength, but few ever ask what lies behind it. They are respected for their willpower, but rarely do people see. They too want to be held without having to prove anything, and Aries once told me, "I don't need anyone to carry me. I just need someone to believe that I get tired too." That sentence might sound simple, but if you've ever lived in a world where you're always the one holding the light for others, you know how heavy that really is. As someone who walks a spiritual path, I truly believe every soul holds a sacred place in their heart where compliments can't reach. Only understanding can unlock that door. And for Aries, that place runs deeper and is more easily forgotten. If they aren't truly seen, not through admiration, but through empathy, they may begin to question their own worth. And when a soul that burns with fire begins to doubt itself, they can become the very one who silently sets their own heart ablaze. The destruction of Aries doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within, when they feel they are only loved for what they give, not for who they are, and so they keep giving. They keep leading, they keep doing incredible things, but one day they withdraw, not because they've grown weak, but because they no longer have a reason to shine. If you love an Aries, or even just have one in your life, learn to look deeper. Don't just praise what they do, ask them how much of themselves they've had to lose just to stay strong. And if you are an Aries listening to this, I hope you know you don't have to fight to be loved. You don't have to achieve to deserve. You are enough as long as you keep that light alive inside your heart. Let that light shine on you too, not just on others. Because sometimes what a soul needs most to keep going is for someone to simply stop, look into their eyes and say, "I see you." No fixing, no expectation, just seeing. Thank you for being here and for listening to the things no one dares to say about Aries. Whether you are an Aries or someone trying to understand one, I hope this journey gave you clarity, compassion, and a deeper, more human view of the sacred fire that lives within them. May you always have the courage to live truthfully and the gentleness to heal yourself and the world around you.